I would love to get into our first presentation by Chris. Let me switch to that.
Quick question, are we okay with any pictures or?
Yeah, that's fine. There's a
Yes.
beeping that's driving me
Yeah.
crazy. We're gonna have to fix that. Because something good just happened this week. So my name is Chris Elston. I'm known as Billboard Chris, and I'm traveling the country, literally hanging out on street corners and going to busy events, going to wherever the people are, just have conversations about gender ideology, mainly medical harm that's coming to kids when they want to switch their sex. Because we have children who are being indoctrinated either in school or primarily on social media as well to believe that it is stereotypes that determine their sex or their gender. So overwhelmingly, it is supportive. At least I would say 9 out of 10 people support what I'm doing. People know instinctively this is wrong. We should be letting children grow up because it's not stereotypes that define who they are. And if a child is gender non-conforming, we should just encourage that. That's fine. You don't need pharmaceutical drugs, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries to find your true inner self. But it doesn't. Most of the supportive people are quiet. I'm just going to keep traveling the country, keep having these conversations because I know eventually we might just stop. It's just a question of how much damage is done to children before that happens.
of it, of course. But what is your gender identity? I've asked this question thousands of times in probably 2,500 hours of conversations out on the streets. And no one really can ever tell me, but it tells you right on here what it is. Your gender identity is based on your personality, your job, hobbies, likes, dislikes, roles in society, and expectations upon you. What does your job have to do with your gender? Nothing, of course. What do your hobbies have to do with your gender? This is all just based off of sexist, regressive stereotypes. And what I say all the time is there's no right way to be a boy or a girl. If a girl's a tomboy, she wants to climb trees and play in the dirt, hates dresses and wants to have short hair, guess what? She's a beautiful girl. Radical concept. How many women in this audience were tomboys growing up? Look at that. Congratulations, you're all transgender. But do not take my word for it. Don't take the word of just this one resource. Let's hear what the greatest professionals in trans health in the country have to say. The #1 ranked pediatric hospital in the country, well, it's #2 now. It was #1 for a long time. I'd like to think I had a part in making it #2. But last year, in August of 2022, I tweeted out this video that Boston Children's Hospital had produced from their gender clinic, where they talk about gender-affirming hysterectomies. Because you see, you need to cut out the womb of teenage girls to affirm their gender. And this video started to take off. The Post Millennial wrote about it. It was getting a lot of views. And I thought to myself, I'd better record this because it's making them look terrible and I have a feeling they're going to delete it. Later that night, they deleted it. So I tweeted out my recorded copy. I sent it to the amazing libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh, who thankfully retweeted it for me, and it went totally viral. I simultaneously recorded 40 other videos that this gender clinic produced. They deleted all of them. Why are they deleting their work? If they're on the side of science and they're the #1 ranked pediatric hospital in the country? Why is some nobody dad from the suburbs of Vancouver, Canada, having them delete their work just for showing it to the world? Well, I'll show you why. Because it's total nonsense. Here's what the director of the Gender Multi-Specialty Clinic at Boston Children's Hospital has to say about what it is that makes children transgender.
A child will often know that they are transgender from the moment that they have any ability to express themselves, and parents will often tell us this. We have parents who tell us that their kids, they knew from the minute they were born practically, and actions like refusing to get a haircut or standing to urinate, trying to stand to urinate, refusing to stand to urinate, trying on siblings' clothing, playing with the quote opposite gender toys, things like that. There is more and more a group of adolescents that we are seeing that really are coming to the realization that they might be trans or gender diverse a little bit later on in their life. So what we're seeing from them is that they always sort of knew something was maybe off and didn't have the understanding to know that they might be trans or have a different gender identity than the one they had been assigned. So that is a growing population that we are seeing, and that's being recognized as being trans and able to be treated.
Able to be treated because your child plays with the opposite gender toys.
Greedy bastards.
Guess what? A little girl with some big brothers, she's going to try to pee standing up. It's more fun. I did it outside just now. A little boy with big sisters, they're going to play dress up. It's called play. Obviously, it doesn't mean your child is transgender. This is one of the top professionals in the country. And these videos were extremely helpful because I think a lot of people knew that crazy stuff was going on in these gender clinics, but they didn't really understand what was happening, and they knew these kids were struggling. But then when you see it like this, just like Matt Walsh's film, What is Woman, where he exposed that there's absolutely no foundation to any of these beliefs, and the deans of these colleges and the professors of the women's and gender studies program can't even name what a woman is. Well, this whole thing is just totally a house of cards. As soon as you have a conversation about this, the whole thing falls apart. And so that's what I've been doing, helping to expose, but these people do it better than I ever could. Here's another genius from Boston Children's Hospital describing what it is to be trans.
So most of the patients that we have in the GEMS clinic actually know their gender, usually around the age of puberty, but a good portion of children do know as early as seemingly from the womb. And
That's enough of that. Seemingly from the womb. Children are transgender. Are they transgender in the womb? I don't know what Democrats would say about 9-month abortions if that were the case. But this is totally insane. This next woman here, another perky video from Boston Children's Hospital about gender-affirming
Gender-affirming
hysterectomy.
hysterectomy is very similar to most hysterectomies that occur. A hysterectomy itself is the removal of the uterus, the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus, and the fallopian tubes, which are attached to the sides of the uterus. Some gender-affirming hysterectomies will also include the removal of the ovaries, but that's technically a separate procedure called bilateral oophorectomy. And not every gender-affirming hysterectomy includes that, and people who are getting gender-affirming hysterectomies do not have to have their ovaries removed.
Well, that's a relief. This stuff is so insane, you have to laugh about it sometimes. It's completely gruesome and ghoulish. But we've reached the peak of insanity. So I want to thank Boston Children's Hospital for helping to change the conversation across the world, because these videos went viral. It then started a wave, a cascading effect of conservatives across the country looking into other gender clinics, exposing them. And the thing about this is, and what I've always known is that, especially when parents learn what's going on, you never forget this. And your jaw hits the floor, and you start to learn more and more and more. And so it's always been my belief that when enough parents learn what's going on, we're going to put a stop to this. And it's happening. Different people are wearing their hats. We now have a law firm in Texas that is formed. 4 men all left their law firms, 4 dads. They have 17 kids between them. And they started a law firm just to represent detransitioners. They could be doing anything to make a bunch of money. This isn't the most lucrative one. But they felt like this was a calling for them. And so now they have a numerous lawsuits that are started. One they just filed a couple weeks ago is also going after the American Academy of Pediatrics. Because one of the doctors involved in the case of this young girl who transitioned, his name is Jason Rafferty, and when he was still a resident, he wrote the current policy that the AAP used for transitioning kids. So there's going to be more cases involving them as well. Every time Jason Rafferty is involved in any of these lawsuits, they're going to be tagging in the AAP as well. And this whole thing's going to come crashing down very quickly. It's not going to take 10 years. We're going to get it done before that. But a lot of people they've never believed that they were doing surgeries on kids. I'm not going to show every single video in this, but this again is Boston Children's Hospital talking about the requirements for surgery. This here, this next one, this was a Zoom call conducted by Marcy Bowers on the right. That's a man. He's the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. He also starred in Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman?, where he said he's not a trans woman, he's just a woman, because it's insulting to call him trans. The woman in the middle there is Johanna Olsen Kennedy. She runs the gender clinic at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And 6-7 years ago, she submitted a request to the NIH, the National Institute of Health, for a grant where they could do some research into giving cross-sex hormones, the opposite sex's hormones, to children as young as 8 years old, provided they've already hit puberty. Almost all the kids hitting puberty at 8 are going to be girls, of course. So they received $5.7 million that was split between CHLA, Los Angeles, UC Benioff here in San Francisco, Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and Boston Children's Hospital, where they're conducting these unregulated experiments on kids, giving the opposite sex hormones to 8-year-old children. This is a total disgrace. In this video, though, Marcy is talking about what happens to boys when you give them puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2. Tanner stage 2 is the technical term for the start of puberty. For girls, this is when their breasts have first started to form. It's probably 2 years before they've had their periods. Boys are going to be a year or two later, of course. So we're talking kids 9, 10, 11, 12. And listen to this.
The second is, was an observation that I had that every single child or adolescent who is truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero. These are, of course, these are just assigned male at birth, so trans femininity. And it's because they never in their lives are exposed to testosterone. That doesn't change. That doesn't change. So blockers prevent the rise of testosterone, and they don't really go on testosterone at or around surgery or into adulthood. And so we don't know. They're going to have a sensation. There's no question about that. But are they going to be able to achieve sexual satisfaction? It's important in relationships, and I know that from my work with female genital mutilation survivors, that the lack of being able to be intimate with a partner is very important. And so this is what really raised the red flag for me, is to say, look, we need to have our eyes open about it. I think it's been beneficial talking about it. I know Joe and many others that have reported to me, they've changed their approach a little bit in their informed consent models, and that we're talking about masturbation now. We're talking about, okay, that's a area of the body that got very dysphoric for you, but you know what? It's all a penis is just a large clitoris. I mean, it's all the same material. It really is. So use it for the pleasurable purposes, partially that it was intended, and we'll see what happens. But these are to be answered questions. So can we avoid puberty and get good adult results? And secondly, how do we assure someone that they're going to be able to be sexually responsive? Do we remove the blockers during the course of their adolescence and let a little bit of puberty come back? Do we delay it a little bit? Maybe into Tanner's 3 or 4, maybe before they have their first orgasms? Maybe.
Spitballing. Live on a Zoom call. What do we do? Do we let a little bit of puberty happen? Should we delay the blockers? They don't know what they're doing. What 10-year-old can consent to throwing away their future adult sexual function when they don't even understand what it means? They're sterilizing kids. This is one of the most harmful things, all of this, that humans have ever done to kids. I've gone back through the history books and looked and said, what's worse, what's more crazy? Because humans do all sorts of crazy things, all sorts of terrible things. This is right up there. I get these indoctrinated young people coming up to me on the street saying, if children can't consent to puberty blockers, how can they consent to puberty? It's okay, please laugh, it's okay, I laugh too. Sometimes I'm laughing on the inside, keeping a straight face. How can they consent to breathing? How can they consent to their heart beating? These are just ridiculous assertions. But we're destroying a generation of struggling children. The kids who end up transitioning are not your college quarterbacks and your high school cheerleaders. They're kids with autism. 35% of the kids at the Tavistock, which is the biggest gender clinic in the world, it's being shut down now and replaced with some regional centers, and they've stopped giving kids puberty blockers in the UK. But 35% of those kids, out of a sample of more than 1,000, had autism, moderate to severe autism. Never mind the mild cases. These are kids who are in state care, foster care, These are kids who've been abused, who've had trauma, who've been sexually abused. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that a girl who's been sexually abused for years isn't loving being a girl right now, is she? And if you give her some out where she can just opt out of her sex and become a boy and escape what for her is the greatest source of all of her trauma, of course some of these kids are going to jump at that. Where I'm from, British Columbia, Canada, we have one psychologist who works for the BC Ministry of Children and Family Development. His name's Wallace Wong. He gave a talk at the Vancouver Public Library a few years ago where he said he's personally transitioning more than 1,000 children, including more than 500 in state care. There's only 6,000 kids in state care in BC. One guy, government employee, transitioning more than 500. In his talk that he gave, he coaches them on how to get the puberty blockers and the hormones quickly if they're not getting them. He says, just say you're suicidal. Works every time. We have the audio, we have the transcript, all of this can be verified. I've tweeted it out several times. 52% of the kids in state care in Canada, by the way, are Indigenous. So while Canada last year before, flew the flag at half-mast in Ottawa for about 9 months because of a hoax of a bunch of kids, Indigenous kids, killed at residential schools and buried in mass graves, a total hoax. Zero evidence for it whatsoever. Someone used some ground-penetrating radar and detected anomalies in the ground, which then someone speculated, oh, these were the bodies of murdered children. And the media picked up on this, and the politicians picked up on this, and it just ran like wildfire. The Washington Post reported that the remains of children as young as 3 years old were discovered. There's no remains discovered. The whole thing's a hoax. But they set aside billions of dollars for reconciliation and flew the flag at half-mast for this hoax of Indigenous children being harmed. Yet today, there are thousands being harmed across Canada, a lot here too in the United States, and no one says a peep. This previous video here, the audio is really bad, but this is from Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. This is where Chloe went. So if the audio is bad, I'll tell you what this guy says, but this is unbelievable. Okay, so what he said there is, that's a woman. Oh, okay, thank you. That makes more sense. It's always these people who say they're trans who are pushing this on to kids. Not always, but a lot of the time. So that's Kellen Lackhart, the psychiatrist at Kaiser Permanente. And she says that they have cut off the breasts of girls as young as 12 years old, and they have done penile inversion surgeries on boys at 16. They started the process at 15, and I think what she means when she says that is they have to do hair removal for about 6 months to a year in advance. So in all likelihood, that's what she means there. But you know, all the Democrats will tell you that this isn't happening to kids. All these trans activists will say it's not happening to kids. Reuters reported last year 12-year-olds are getting their breasts cut off. The New York Times reported 300,000 children in the United States have been diagnosed officially with gender dysphoria, never mind the ones who haven't had these official diagnoses for insurance purposes. This is a craze, this is a social contagion that has swept through girls, primarily girls. There's a huge uptick in boys as well. But this used to affect 1 out of tens of thousands of children. Now it's affecting 1 out of tens, depending where you are. Back home at this Langley Fine Arts School where I live, 45 girls in middle school and high school at one school now say they are trans or non-binary. So the number one objection you will always hear anytime this comes up is that kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition them. Imagine that. Imagine saying kids are going to kill themselves if we don't cut them up, stop their development, and sterilize them. This is a coercive, manipulative lie designed to shut people up and designed to coerce parents, like what happened with Chloe's parents, and we'll get into this when we talk to her in a minute here. But they're told, these parents are told, well, Mom and Dad, you can have a live daughter or a dead son. Just awfully coercive, and it's a lie. There's no evidence to support this. Of course there's no evidence to support this. Now, there have been no quality studies done on kids. The best studies we do have are all with the adult population when it comes to suicides. And in a few of these charts, which you'll find if you go to the website statsforgender.org, which is a fantastic website with all sorts of information, a Swedish study found that suicide rates were higher for kids with, or for adults with personality disorders, schizophrenia, substance abuse, bipolar disorder, depression, autism. Suicide rates were all higher for those. And of course, suicidality is higher for these kids. They want to change their sex. They're depressed. Of course, there's going to be more suicidal ideation. That doesn't mean there's an epidemic of actual suicides, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're going to kill themselves if we don't transition them. The best study we do have with the adult population was done in Sweden, where nobody was lost to follow-up, and it showed that 10 years after sex reassignment surgery, suicide rates, after accounting for similar mental health comorbidities. So let's say you've got someone with bipolar disorder, and you've got someone with bipolar disorder who transitioned. The person who transitioned, 10 years later, suicide rates were 19.1 times higher than their peers. If you compare them to the general public, their suicide rates were 40 times higher than their peers after transition. So it's all a lie. All the data we have points to suicides going up, not down, if you transition them, which anyone with common sense can understand. So, what do we do about this? The answer is we do something. People ask me all the time, what can I do, Chris? What can I do? And my answer is, I don't know, because I don't know your skills, I don't know your gifts, I don't know what your passions are, I don't know what you like to do, but you've got to do something. So I did something. And I'm just a guy who used to have a real job. I was a financial advisor most of my life. Then I had a little insurance business. I didn't really love either of those things. But I've done the traditional career path, going from financial advisor to sandwich board guy standing out on the street getting yelled at. And it's been the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. And the first thing I did was I put up this beautiful billboard that said, "I love J.K. Rowling." I put that up in Vancouver, Canada, because a woman in the UK named Kelly J. Keane, or Posey Parker, some of you know her as, she put up a sign, the same thing, at the Edinburgh train station, and it got taken down after a day because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech. It's got a big red heart on it. So I got tired of our freedom of speech coming under attack. I got tired of people losing their jobs for stating biological reality. I've got 2 little girls. I've been learning all about this. And I don't want to send my girls into a world that doesn't know what a woman is. I don't want to send them into a world trying to change the sex of children. There are all sorts of crazy things going on. But I decided to do something. So I put up this sign. It also lasted just one day because a Vancouver politician named Sarah Kirby-Young said it was hate speech. And she pressured the sign company to take it down. So they did. As you can see, it got paint bombed overnight. And they called in the sign guys who came in on the weekend, getting paid overtime to cover up the sign. The boom that guy's in got stuck. It broke down. He was stuck there for a couple hours. I tweeted, "God, is that you?" But they covered it up, and that was fine. That was great. Because I was prepared for that, and I leveraged all the outrage online, and it just went a bit viral. And I quickly organized a quick little fundraising campaign, and a week later I had the same billboard up in San Francisco, and then Portland, and then Los Angeles, all throughout Utah, all throughout the metro in Washington, D.C., and then Times Square. So that was my September of 2020. I was extremely busy. That was a wild month, because when you first dip your toes into this arena, your life changes dramatically. But that's fine. But at the end of September, I'd completely run out of money, and no sign companies would work with me anyway. And my whole objective in this thing is to start conversations. To have conversations, but also to start conversations, and to activate other people. So I did what I do, and I had some signs made. And I couldn't put up any billboards anymore. So I said, forget you guys, I'll just become a billboard. And so I wear signs like this that say children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And I've got my definition of a dad, which needs to get in the proper dictionary, but it's a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology. And I know I look ridiculous, and that's okay, because I'm 48 years old this year, and it doesn't matter what people think of me. My girls and my wife know who I am, and ultimately that's all that matters. But these signs are extremely effective. People come up to me and they say, what are puberty blockers? And I have a conversation, and I film them. And if it's a nice person and they are okay with me putting it online, I'll put it online, and it helps to educate other people. And if it's a mean person, well, I guarantee I'm putting that online. Because they need to be exposed. And the internet loves those videos, and they go very viral. So when people think of me, a lot of times they just think of me getting attacked all the time. But really, 98% of the time, I'm just having nice conversations with people. The attacks do happen. This was in Montreal in March of 2021. This was Antifa. They came out to see me on the street. And there's a whole bunch of vulgarity, so I'm going to fast forward. But I got my arm broken blocking a traffic cone of all things. Big orange traffic cone. The base on those things is pretty thick. He was trying to hit me in the head with it, so I blocked it 4 times, but there's really no protection for this bone, so that bone broke. But here's the thing. Never be a victim. People don't like victims. Victimhood doesn't play well. These people did me a favor, because this reached millions of people, and really no one knew who I was yet. I really had no support the first 6 months. These videos went viral. And because we can never let these jerks win, the next day, I went to Queen's University and had some conversations. Because that's what we do, we just keep going. And in anything in life, when you're just persistent and you don't give up and you've got a passion for it and you work hard at it, eventually you're going to break through and you're going to have tremendous success. This campaign of mine is having success. Thousands of people are fighting very hard now. And we're winning big time. So let's look at the positives. Oh, these are more crazy people in Ottawa. So that was fun. That was me. That was a woman named Chanel. I'd been there on my own in the morning, got mobbed by 200 university students, went back there in the afternoon with a couple people. And that was the #1 story on the news at night. I talked to CBC, our local communist broadcaster up there. I talked to CTV, I talked to them at length, 15 minutes each. This was the top story on the news at night, and guess how much of our interview they aired? 0. Because they're not looking to report the truth, they're just looking for a hate quote. But when you know how to speak about this, you don't give them anything, because of course this isn't about hate, this is about love. And so I didn't give them anything, so they don't run with anything. But I've gotten to the point now where I love all the fake news, because all it does is generate media. All it does is cause other people to start looking into this. So please say whatever you want about me, it doesn't matter. I'm immune to it now, and it's all good. Now, that specific incident was a year and a half or so ago. A few months ago, I went back to that same street, and instead of it being just myself or the 2 people who came out with me later in the day, this time I had 500 friends with me. About 500 counter-protesters as well. But that's a sign of the growth that has happened. A lot of the Muslim community came out. This then started a wave of Muslims protesting more. And on September 20th of this year, it wasn't 500 of us, It was about 30,000 of us all across the country. So when you just go out and do something, the moral of the story is good things happen. You just got to keep doing it. Let's talk about other wins that have happened these past few years. Finland. They deviated from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health's standards of care. They conducted a systematic review, which is the gold standard when reviewing all of the science for these things. They looked at all the studies, and they found that the body of evidence for pediatric transition was inconclusive. There's no support for this. And so now, technically in Finland, they're still giving puberty blockers to kids, but they're ruling out all the kids with other mental health comorbidities. They're not doing surgeries. It's a fraction of what it used to be. So that's an improvement. It's still not perfect, of course, but it's a big improvement. Sweden followed suit. They looked at more than 9,900 abstracts. They only found 24 relevant studies, and none of those studies were randomized control trials. And they came to the same conclusions, which is that there's no evidence to support transitioning kids. So they put a stop to this. There is evidence that it's impacting their bones. We've known this for a long time. Bone demineralization is one of the side effects of this puberty blocking drug called Lupron. That's normally the drug that's used. Technically, these drugs are called gonadotropin releasing hormone agonists, and they stop the pituitary gland from releasing a couple hormones called luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which in turn trigger the testes to produce testosterone or the ovaries to produce estrogen. So when kids are on these drugs, they don't end up producing their own hormones. And so that's why their secondary sex characteristics don't develop. That's why girls' breasts won't grow, their hips won't get wider, boys' genitals don't grow. It's causing them to lose bone density. A girl in Sweden on a documentary called The Trans Train, she suffered spinal fractures. She has a condition called osteopenia. She's in chronic pain because of these drugs. A woman I talked to a couple of years ago here in California told me that her daughter was on puberty blockers from 12 to 15. They did bone scans each year, and she lost 11% of her bone density. This is at a time when her bones should be getting much stronger. So the whole thing is just a wild experiment on kids. This is child abuse, pure and simple. But in more good news, in England, they have stopped giving kids puberty blockers. And it wasn't the legislators who legislated this away. It was the medical board. It was the lifetime pediatricians who, again, conducted a review of the evidence. And they found that there was a lack of evidence to support their safety or clinical effectiveness. So they're not doing this anymore in England. Norway and Denmark have followed suit. The Academy of Medicine in France has stated that it's impossible to tell which children who have gender dysphoria will grow out of it. But here's the other thing, which is crucial in this discussion. Before they gave kids puberty blockers, back when kids with severe gender dysphoria, or gender identity disorder as it was known before 2013, 80 to 90% of these kids just grew out of it when they went through puberty. The most recent study that was done before puberty blockers followed 139 boys from the age of 5 all the way into their 20s. 87.8% of these boys just grew out of it. 63.6% grew up to be gay. So, when you're talking to leftists who say you're anti-LGBTQ, they're anti-LGB. They want to sterilize kids who will grow up to be gay. That's who this is really hurting. The Tavistock has confirmed this more recently. Now with this craze that has really taken off since 2015, are all these kids going to grow up to be gay? Of course not. As I said, tons of these kids have autism, they've been abused, there's trauma. Who knows what's going on? These kids are struggling for a variety of reasons, but we need to leave them alone. If they want to modify their body as an adult, that's a totally different conversation. We still shouldn't be rushing in to hormones and surgeries because these doctors have sworn an oath to first do no harm, and you never go straight to the most invasive procedures. They're not just order takers for hormones and surgeries, yet that's how a lot of them act. Early this year, this is Jamie Reed. She worked at the, yes, let's give her a hand. She worked at the Washington University Transgender Clinic in St. Louis. She describes herself as a queer woman married to a trans man and says she's politically left of Bernie Sanders, so she's not some terrible white guy like me. They can't cancel her for being a bigot. She worked at the gender clinic for 4 years. She was case manager. More than 1,000 children came through the doors while she was there. And she wrote this op-ed for the Free Press. She submitted an affidavit to the Attorney General of Missouri, confirming everything I've been saying. I felt like I was reading my own writing. So thank you so much to Jamie Reed for blowing the whistle on this. They've now stopped this in Missouri. And in fact, the gender clinic where she worked at, according to new laws in Missouri, existing children who were already on puberty blockers could have continued. But guess what? Because the new law extends the statute of limitations 20 odd years, giving these kids the right to sue in the future, their legal team said, we can't afford the liability. We're not going to treat these kids anymore. So that's another great thing that's happening. 20 states, just in this past year, have passed legislation to stop this child abuse. In all of these legislations, there is, almost all of them, they have increased the statute of limitations 20 odd years. Previously, for medical malpractice, depending on the state, the statute of limitations was 1 to 3 years in every state in the country. Now they've taken care of that. Now we've got lawsuits flying, finally. So lawfare is one great way we're going to put a stop to this. And we are winning. This is a picture from the protest I held a couple months ago, same street where I'd previously been mobbed. Now we've got tons of support. People all over the world are fighting this. And a little over a year ago, I remember meeting with some people in Congress, and these politicians did not want to touch this issue. They were comfortable talking about the sports issue. Because you've got Leah Thomas, 6'4" Leah Thomas, who was 500th in the men's division. You've got him lapping women in the pool in the NCAA, stealing their gold medals. And everyone with half a brain in their head can see this and know that it's wrong. The issue of child transition, as we've just discussed for 45 minutes, is a little more complicated, takes a bit more of a nuanced conversation. And these politicians didn't understand it at the time, so they didn't want to touch it. They said to me, well, what's the Democrats' argument for this? They were afraid. How do you deal with fear? You overcome it by educating people. Once you understand this subject, you're more confident to talk about it. And when you're more confident to talk about it, you will talk about it. And you can handle these objections. There are only 3 objections that these leftists ever come up with. And when I say leftists, I mean the far leftists. I understand there are lifelong Democrats who are, of course, against this. When I went to Boston and had a protest there outside their children's hospital, about 10 people came and stood with me. Most of them were moms. Almost all of them were lifelong Democrats. But the Democratic Party is not representing their constituents right now. There's a complete and utter disconnect. So we just got to keep educating these people. We got to keep getting the proof out there, and we are going to stop this child abuse. Now I'm going to end this presentation before I talk with Chloe with a very powerful video. This brave young woman, her name is Prisha. I found this video one day. Every once in a while I go onto Reddit's detransition group. That's where a lot of the detransitioners tell their stories for the first time. That's where they hang out. And I saw this video. It's very raw. She probably thought only 50 people were going to watch it. But I tweeted it out and it went viral. And at the time I thought, I hope she doesn't get mad at me. But she put it out there for people to see. And fortunately, she didn't get mad at me. She was thankful. And she has now been testifying at legislatures all across the country with Chloe. She's another hero in this fight. But have a listen to this, because these are the types of children who are being affected by this evil ideology.
I can't believe this happened. I ruined my life. When you break it down, I decided that I didn't want to be a woman before I had ever even experienced being a woman. I had no idea what being a woman was like because I was a child. And now I feel like I will never entirely know. I want to say that I really feel like some people in the trans community and the trans medicalists and the doctors really, really target the most vulnerable of us. I have borderline personality disorder, and I know for a fact that this is the reason for my transition. It's a very difficult mental illness, and one of the core features is not having any sense of self or identity, and my doctors knew this. I told them, even though they didn't ask, that I had been diagnosed with BPD, and it was all fine to them. I wasn't happy as a girl, so that meant I was a boy and I was trans, and so I just took the cure that was handed to me. I was told that I was going to get a cure, and I wouldn't want to kill myself anymore. And it wasn't true. No, I didn't want to cry in this video, but this is such a hard thing to talk about. I lost a lot of things to this, and I just hope that anyone else who's going through what I went through as a young girl will not be prescribed hormones and surgery because of other things. You know, there are so many mental health disorders that make you hate your body, and the solution isn't to change your body, it's to fix your brain, you know? I just don't want anyone else to ever feel this way. I lost my voice, I lost my chest. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to have kids. I feel like no one wants to date me or love me because I'm ruined.
This is child abuse. There is no such thing as a transgender child. They're called girls and boys, and they're beautiful just as they are. No drugs or scalpels needed. So we're going to stop this. It's not government who's going to stop this. We are going to stop this. We have to stop relying on some savior in government. We have to stop relying on a president to fix all of our problems. The way we fix these problems is we fix these problems. Grassroots level. So thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And we're going to talk to Chloe now. Okay, thank you. Maybe we can turn this off.
Yes.
Thank you. Quick message, December of 2021, I want to say?
2022.
2022, that's right. So it's not even been 2 years. And look at the effect you're having. What have you been up to this year?
More than I can really count, really.
Yeah.
I mean, just within the past month, I'd say I'd been to probably about 5 or so states, 5 or so different places. That includes the GenSpec conference in Denver, I actually managed to get a booth in at the American Academy of Pediatrics conference as well.
Amazing. Wow. How'd that go?
It went awesome. It was like a convention type thing. So we had like it was a little booth. We had a lot of doctors come around, and most of them were very understanding and rightfully shocked and disgusted that their own profession was doing this to children. And of course, we had a few activist doctors as well who weren't very happy that we were there.
Right.
And on my birthday this year, my 19th birthday, I actually got to testify in front of Congress.
If
And
you
my
haven't
lawsuit.
seen her testimony, you've got to check it out. Straight fire coming from Chloe. And you're how old?
I'm 19.
19, my gosh, what a future you have. So, you've been doing incredible things. I'm so glad you went to the AAP's conference. We both hung out outside their conference last year in Anaheim, and I had the same experience. Probably 200 doctors, 300 doctors walked by, quick little conversations. 90% of them, of course, support us because this is all insane. A lot have no idea.
That's the scary part.
This is what people need to understand. Most doctors are doing their own specialty. They have no idea. They're working in the ER, they're doing something else. These gender clinics occupy these tiny little spaces at these huge hospitals where they've got 5 doctors, social worker, a nurse, whatever. And they're the ones, it's really 5, 6 people harming 1,000 kids in their city. So, yeah, they don't know what's going on. So thank you so much for going there. But maybe you can give us a little bit of your backstory so people understand how this all happened. So what was life like growing up for you?
I was the youngest of 5 kids with 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. I was definitely a lot more girly the younger I was. My dad once told me, actually, that I wouldn't even leave the house if I wasn't like in a tutu in bright colors, because that was what I loved at the time. And eventually, as I got older, I started to take on, I guess, more of the traits that my older brothers and the boys in my family and in my grade had. I started to become more of, you could say I was a tomboy. I liked playing video games. I liked being in the company of boys. And I really looked up to my older brothers. I hope that one day I'd end up half as strong and funny and just generally awesome as they were.
Yeah.
And I struggled a little bit socially. As close as I was, especially to my older brothers, I felt like, because of our age gap, I mean, they're probably about like 7 to 8 years older than me, roughly. There were a lot of ways I didn't really relate to them or my other older siblings. And they moved out pretty much while I was still in elementary school. And at school, I didn't really have a whole lot of friends most of the time. I was getting bullied, in fact. And so I turned to the internet because I wanted to find the community that I didn't have in real life.
So what year was this? How old were you?
Well, I started using the computer when I was a pretty young kid, but when I was 12, I would say was when I started using social media, because that's when I got my first smartphone.
Okay. So where'd you run into this concept of trans for the first time?
Through social media, actually. Mainly through Instagram, which there was a lot of influence from Tumblr, which is where a lot of the modern transgender movement has originated from. And at first I was mostly seeing content that was like based around my own personal interests, right? Things like illustration, art, video games, anime, manga, comics, cartoons. But a lot of the users within the communities around these things were also people who identified as a part of the LGBT. Many of them were young men and women who identified as transgender. And this was something that it was very interesting to me because I never really heard anything like it. It was very novel to me at the time, this idea that some people, their idea of their sex doesn't align with what they actually were born as. And I found myself really drawn to it. I think in large part because it was just so interesting. And the community itself seemed so very bright and colorful. It was very cheerful. It had all these new phrases that you could use to express yourself, and of course, like the colorful flags and artwork around it. And as a kid who didn't really feel like she had much in the way of a community growing up, the themes of like self-discovery and acceptance of those who are different was something that it just hit really close to home to me.
So I often say this is a cult. I think it has all the hallmarks of a cult. And the first thing that happens when someone enters into a cult is they get love bombed. Would you say that happened to you?
I actually wasn't directly interacting with the community until I started medically transitioning, but just the sheer influence of learning up about all this information alone and seeing how happy these people seem to be within this community was enough for me to start pursuing it myself.
Okay.
I definitely did experience it the further that I went into transition,
Yeah.
especially as I got my first shot of testosterone. And I think when I announced that I just had surgery, that was probably the most I had ever felt celebrated in my life up until that point.
What an upside down culture. You get a double mastectomy as how old were you?
I was 15. I was only a sophomore in high school.
And you get celebrated. So from when you first discovered this online, you were about 12 years old, you said?
Yeah.
At the time? How long did it take from that point until you ended up at a gender clinic?
I'd say maybe about 6 months even.
Wow. So first appointment at the gender clinic, what happened?
It started with a psychologist, because when I came out to my mom and dad, they wanted to be supportive of me, and like they were okay with letting me present myself differently, and were trying to accommodate like my new name and stuff, but they weren't really actually sure how to go about it, because this is also something that was very novel to them. They didn't really hear anything like this at all from my older siblings, and my dad especially suspected that it might come from some of my other struggles in other areas of my life, like with socializing, with getting along, especially with other girls, with being a tomboy, with being kind of awkward. And so they started doing their own research so they could make sure that they were helping me the best that they could during this time. And a lot of it seemed to point to Kaiser as the top choice in the state of California for caring for youth who have gender dysphoria. And, you know, they thought that they thought what that meant was that they would help me with these feelings,
Yeah.
that they would maybe dive deeper into them, where it was coming from, and that I would be helped in coping with these feelings until I was an adult and more capable of making potentially permanent decisions around my body.
Yeah,
But that didn't really happen.
This is what normal people think. You go to a
Right.
doctor, you're going to get care. So you saw a psychologist,
Yes.
and what did the psychologist say?
Pretty much as soon as gender was brought up, that was all that was really focused on. I mean, I had some real struggles in school with socializing, with fitting in. And I was previously diagnosed with ADHD. I had symptoms that were strongly indicative of me having autism, actually, and a body image disorder, and even an eating disorder. But all of that was just completely ignored. A lot of my distress around those things was associated with my gender, with the way that I was born.
Right. So they just practiced affirmation.
Yes,
Of your new
that was
gender.
pretty much all that they did. They referred to me by the name that I preferred and as my parents' son and so on, but they never really actually helped me.
So they referred to you as your parents' son right away. And how old were you at this point?
12,
You're
going on
still
13.
12. So how many appointments with the psychologist?
I can't really remember. It wasn't enough, frankly. I mean,
Any therapist?
Yeah, it was a therapist at first, and the
Yeah.
first therapist I saw actually was so lousy that I was actually becoming more distressed, even though my identity was being affirmed.
Right.
There were issues in my life that were not being addressed at this time. Like, I would talk to him about my struggles in school socially, with not having a phone anymore, with not really feeling like I fit in with my peers, and that I was being targeted for the way that I was presenting myself, right? And all he really had to say was, well, that's weird. I'm sorry you're going through that. And so, of course, I would become more and more distressed over time.
Right.
And naturally, I would associate this with my gender dysphoria.
Right.
And eventually I had multiple therapists and psychologists over the years, and eventually I was switched to a new one. And I think that's when the ball started rolling.
So you're how old when you first get referred to Kaiser?
I was 12.
And when did you start talking about puberty blockers?
That started with my parents, I think. And they were getting pretty concerned because I was getting more and more pushy about it. They didn't really understand why I was feeling this way, first of all, and why I thought this was the only option that I had.
So you'd learned about these online?
Yes.
I assume. Okay.
And they turned to doctors, of course.
Okay.
They asked them, well, why is she pushing for this? Why does she want this so badly? Why does she have to do this now? Why can't we wait until she's an adult and she's more developed?
Right.
And they were told, well, gender identity, that's innate. Children know what gender they are from a very young age. They understand this. She knows exactly what she wants. And then they cited suicide statistics to convince them that if I weren't affirmed in this identity that I had, if I weren't affirmed in my choice to transition, then it was very likely that I would commit suicide. They were basically given the ultimatum of having a very suicidal and very likely dead daughter, or a living, thriving, happy transgender son.
And you're still 12 at this point?
I was 13.
13 at this point. But it was 12 when just the whole concept of transgenderism first came to you online. So you grew up normal, happy-go-lucky kid, girly girl, whatever. Now, after less than a year of being introduced to this concept, they're telling your parents that you might kill yourself if they don't transition.
Yes.
So you're a 13-year-old now. Is this when they first give you puberty blockers?
Yes. It was only, I think it was only less than a year before between my first consultation with a therapist and actually starting on the physical interventions.
Right. So puberty blockers at 13.
Yes.
Testosterone at what age?
Same age.
Same
It was
age.
only about a month or two afterward.
Right. So let's talk about this for a second. The number one argument that these trans activist doctors say is, well, puberty blockers are reversible. Well, first of all, they have the suicide argument, but the other argument that you hear every time is puberty blockers are reversible. And the sales pitch is that these just buy time for a child to explore their gender identity so they don't have the trauma of developing into a woman or developing into a man. Because apparently it would be too traumatic if you were to start developing, because you can't undo that. They treat puberty as though it's a medical condition. But here, in this case, it wasn't to buy time to explore your gender identity.
No.
You got puberty blockers and then you got testosterone less than a month later.
Yeah, and I was actually about 4 years into puberty because I already had an early puberty, which is where a lot of the distress around my body came from, actually. They never really explored that. They had that on file, but they just didn't pay any attention to that. And it's interesting that a lot of activists use that argument that they're using it to delay puberty and just like cause like a little pause in the meanwhile, because that was not the idea at all for starting me on blockers. They already had the idea in mind of putting me on testosterone. The way it was explained to me, it would clear out the sex hormones in my body to basically make way for the new ones.
The puberty blockers would clear out the estrogen in your body.
Yeah.
Right.
And in doing so, in the months that I was on them alone, you know, I was already a few years into puberty, but now like my body was completely devoid of sex hormones. And this essentially put me into a state of chemically induced menopause. So at 13 and a half years old, I was experiencing what women only really start to experience once they're in about their late 40s to mid 50s. I was experiencing hot flashes, which I could best describe as this uncomfortable hot feeling that was very intermittent, happened daily, every few hours. It would just like spread throughout my body, and it was accompanied by these other unpleasant sensations like tingling, itching, and sometimes like even these like little burning sensations in my limbs and like my fingers. And I was very lethargic during this time. It wasn't very comfortable at all.
So 13-year-old girl going through menopause, chemically induced menopause. Menopause, of course, has 100 side effects of its own. Early onset osteoporosis, early onset dementia. You can look it up. I've tweeted out this before. But they wanted to clear out her hormones. Now, we have no idea what the lack of our own hormones are doing to our developing brain. We have no idea what these wrong sex hormones are doing with our developing brain. But I sometimes tell people when this comes up, I'll say to them, whether you believe in God or evolution, none of this makes any sense. Because if you believe in God, this ideology teaches that children were born wrong. Obviously, that makes no sense. If you believe in evolution, as virtually every trans activist does, they're essentially saying that 1 billion years of the process of natural selection has failed, and we now need a pharmaceutical company to help children be their true selves. We're messing with nature. If you believe in evolution, well, we've been on this planet as human beings for a couple 100,000 years. We are the product of 1 billion years of the process of natural selection. But now we're going to mess all of that up and give a drug that's never been approved, that has no studies to back it, a drug that's approved for endometriosis in women, but for women they're only supposed to go on it for 6 months because the side effects are so severe. A drug given to men for prostate cancer, that's what this was originally approved for. A drug given to this day to pedophiles to chemically castrate them. And this we're giving to kids to clear out your natural hormones and then replace them with hormones that don't belong in your body. Women naturally have about 5% of the amount of testosterone as men. They're not equipped to have 100%. So what was testosterone like for you?
It was interesting, to say the least. Especially after a period of having absolutely no sex hormones in my body, finally having it replaced, that felt great. I finally had my energy back. I was probably more energetic than ever. I was feeling very confident, and the cognitive effects were pretty much immediate. You know, I guess you could say that I was experiencing the gender euphoria that the transgender community often speaks of, especially because I believed this at the time to be a big step in my life towards becoming my greater self as the boy, the man that I was always supposed to be.
And what this gender euphoria is a high from testosterone.
Yes.
Anyone who takes testosterone, including the men in this audience, if you took it, you're going to feel better. You're going to have more confidence. You're going to have less anxiety. You're going to get bigger muscles. For the women, it redistributes their body fat, which they're all going to love. It stops their period, which I'm guessing might be fun to have that stop. What do I know? But probably not the best thing in the world. So right away, there's this honeymoon period where these girls feel great.
Yes.
Which they call gender euphoria, as though you're now the person you were always meant to be. But it's just the effects of a drug.
But men and women don't experience euphoria from living their lives as themselves. That's the thing.
Right.
I did have a bit of a honeymoon period that lasted for maybe about a year. And eventually I went back to baseline. But the physical changes, they came very immediately. The first one I can think of would be the voice drop, which was probably about 2 to 3 weeks in. So it was very quick, very deep, very dramatic. And throughout a lot of my adolescence, my voice has since lightened up, but it was actually deeper than a lot of my male peers. and even a lot of the adult men around me. My own teachers, some of my family, and the changes to my appearance came in within the first few months as well. My jawline started becoming more chiseled. So did a lot of my other facial features. My nose started getting bigger. My brow bone became more defined. And the hair all over my body, from my head, my eyebrows, my face, on my limbs, became thicker. And of course, the muscle came. And when you have a body image disorder, you yearn to be able to change your body. And it finally felt like I had control over the way that I looked. And with the amount of muscle I was building, with the glow in my skin, apparently testosterone also makes it more easy to tan, I felt like I looked great. And it was a huge confidence boost for a little bit.
Right.
And the social dynamics for me didn't really change until I was in high school, because I was still in middle school at this time when I started. And even as I was going through the changes to my appearance and I started to look and sound more like a boy my age, everybody I went to school with, most of them had known me since elementary school. So I wasn't fooling anybody. They knew that I was a woman. And I just decided up until I was in high school that I wouldn't really make any further effort to blend in because of this, until there was an incident one day when a classmate of mine came up to me in a crowded classroom and he sexually assaulted me. And that incident was very complex for me emotionally, because you'd think that with so many other people in the room, somebody would have come up to me, right, and asked me if I was okay, if I needed any help. Nobody went up to him like, what the hell, why would you do that? And none of them seemed to either care or notice. I felt very powerless, of course. I didn't even feel like I could tell anybody, not even the school staff. The school that I was going to, I had like an IEP 504 plan in place to help with my education. They weren't even adhering to it. If they weren't helping me with my educational needs, I mean, how could I help them? How could I expect them to help me feel safe after I've been assaulted by one of their students on their campus? And I was already in the mindset of, I'm a guy. I'm going to become a man. How would anybody take me seriously if I told them that my breasts have been assaulted? I mean, what guy says that? I know I won't be taken seriously. I just have to man up. And after that, I decided that I was never going to be taken advantage of in that way ever again. Nobody was ever going to know that I was a woman. That was when I made the decision to start binding and hiding my breasts.
So you're how old now?
Now?
At that point, how old are you?
13 and a half still.
Oh,
It was
13, okay.
towards the very end of my 8th grade year.
Okay, so you started binding.
Yes.
And you binded for how long?
Maybe about like 2.5 years.
Wow.
Between starting binding and undergoing surgery.
Okay, so surgery at 15, right?
Yes. And by that point in time, now that I was in school, now that I was in high school, by the time I was in my freshman year, like I had been on hormones for long enough, and the hormones were powerful enough for me to look and sound just like any other 14, 15-year-old boy. And everybody knew me as a guy named Leo. Nobody really knew any differently other than maybe some people who I went to school with before. And seeing the dynamics change was kind of cool, starting to make more, I don't even know how you would describe it, I guess more masculine friendships with other men around me. And I had some fun times. And I'd say that one thing that was valuable that came out of it was that I understand men, and especially young men, a lot more now. I can sympathize with them quite a bit.
Because of
It's-
because of the friendships that you form?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also like just starting to understand how the male mind works, having been on testosterone, and also the expectations placed on men. It's definitely, it's not easy. You don't really have as much room to talk about personal hardships. You're expected to be tough. And that was something that was very difficult for me to deal with because I had a lot of hardships at the time. And my friendships and relationships in general were a lot less intimate. And it started to really stress me out, actually. And I started to feel more and more dissociated from my body, even though all these changes coming that I was told were supposed to make me happy. It wasn't. Maybe for a short while, but the excitement went away.
Right.
And my baseline after I started was worse. And I really started to go into this downward spiral. And eventually, my sophomore year of high school, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I went to therapy. I was medicated for it. I kept getting worse.
So sophomore year of high school, you're getting worse. Worse than when you started, and you haven't had surgery yet, right?
Yes.
You had it?
Not
Right, okay.
not yet by this point in time.
So not yet? So tell us how that all happened and how you felt afterwards.
About halfway through my sophomore year was when I started to really think, like, I'm sick of wearing this binder every day. Like, it's, the best way I could describe it is like, it's kind of like in the shape of a tank top. They come in like full body or half body. And it's basically like a compression garment for the breasts. So as you can imagine, it's not the most comfortable thing to wear. And especially not if you live in California, or at least my part of California, where it gets up to like 100 and whatever degrees during the hot season. I would work out in this thing. I would go swimming in it. I would walk home from school in the heat in this thing. And basically whenever I went out or whenever I was going to be seen by anybody, I'd have it on. And frankly, I was sick of it. I wanted to be free of it. And every day coming back home from school, it felt like I was taking a mask as I took it off. I would look down at my chest, and even though the rest of me pretty much looked like a boy, I still had this very feminine part of my body. And it was very uncomfortable for me to look at. I thought that I just wanted to look like any other boy my age. I wanted to be able to take off my shirt like them, not have this stupid thing poking out the collar of my shirt, to be able to bare my chest to the sun like they could. And so I started seeking surgery.
And so what was that process like?
Well, I think after the first consultation, which it was very easy to get a letter of referral, it was basically just, well, you've been transitioning for this amount of time, so you're free to go.
Right.
And after that first appointment, me and my parents were referred to this, they called it a top surgery classroom in the clinic for children and their families to attend to learn more about top surgery. Basically just a propaganda class.
This is at Kaiser Permanente?
Yes.
In Oakland?
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember going there and sitting down and looking at all the kids around me. And one thing that really stood out to me, even at the time, was that a lot of those kids looked pretty young. Like maybe about 12 years old at the youngest. And a lot of them didn't even look like they were on hormones yet. They were still very feminine looking. And yet they were already seeking surgery. Even as I noticed this though, it kind of also just reinforced the idea of, well, this is normal. Like, I'm not the only one.
Right. So Kaiser Permanente is hosting top surgery classes for children. it's not top surgery, it's a radical elective double mastectomy is what it is. Whenever we talk about this, we need to stop using these euphemisms. Always use the right words.
Double mastectomy.
They're hosting classes for children to get their breasts cut off. And the group dynamic is making all these other kids feel like this is normal. So you had the class, then what? They scheduled the surgery?
I had maybe about 1 or 2 more appointments after that.
Yeah.
And within 6 months of that first consultation for surgery, I went under the knife. And this was like mid-2021. So the COVID measures here were still pretty strict. Lockdown was still very much a thing. And if you remember at the time, a lot of surgeries that were considered elective were canceled or postponed because they weren't deemed necessary.
Right.
Well, they did an examination of my breasts before and afterward. They were perfectly healthy. They were removing perfectly healthy tissue. And somehow it wasn't considered elective.
Right. So, I mean, I know this is a sensitive issue, but what's life been like after the surgery? And how long did it take you to realize that you made a mistake?
I mean, immediately after, when I was fully conscious, it was like, wow, this really happened. The hard part is finally over, right? This is a huge step in my life. And I'm so excited to be able to fully heal and finally just look like any other man.
Yeah.
And it didn't really go quite as planned. The physical parts of the post-op process were pretty difficult. I wasn't able to shower for maybe the first week afterward, and my mom had to take some time off of work to help me around the house because my mobility was so limited. I mean, it's a major surgery in a very connected part of the body. So I didn't really have much of a range of motion in my arms. I couldn't even lift my head, my arms above my head up until maybe about like 3 months post-op. And the day that I got my stitches taken out, just thinking about it makes me really sick. The sensation was completely different. I mean, this is like the breasts are an erogenous area. And so a lot of the nerve endings were severed in the process of cutting into my breast and taking the tissue out, right? And they also made skin grafts out of my areolas, my nipples, to place them into a different position, a more masculine positioning, they called it. And I remember when they were taking out the stitches, it didn't quite hurt. I mean, I looked down at it and I expected pain, but it felt more like electricity running through my chest. It was this numb sensation. And when I went home, that was when I was able to bathe afterward, and I would start having to do the aftercare for my scars and for my nipple grafts. And I would have to do this every night, before and after every shower, undoing and redoing the dressings, cleaning the wounds, putting Vaseline on it to keep the graft moist and help it to heal. It was like I was looking at a battlefield on my chest. And because during the grafting process, they severed the blood supply of the areolas, the skin on top was black. It was dead. And over time, as it healed, it would slowly fall off. And just watching this process happening slowly over the next month or so post-op was just, I felt like a monster looking at myself. I felt like some sort of Frankenstein's monster. And I felt worse. I thought for a while that these feelings of depression were just a normal part of the post-op process, and that eventually I would get better. Well, I didn't. I started to realize that I missed looking feminine. I missed having a soft face and a soft-looking body. I missed being able to wear dresses and skirts and have my hair long and style myself in a certain way that I wouldn't be judged for as a woman. But now if I tried to go to school in a skirt, I don't even know what people would call me. I don't know what they would say to me. I had a lot of shame around these feelings. So in the comfort of my own room, sometimes I would wear some of my old girl clothing. But I kept feeling so much worse the more that I did it, because I felt like I was trapped. I started to realize that I was not meant for even the responsibility of being a man. And I couldn't admit to myself for the longest time that this was a mistake. But the regret was, it came in maybe even within like 2 to 3 months afterward. But I couldn't put a name to it. I didn't know how to admit even to myself that all this was wrong, because I was so deep into it. I was probably about 2.5 years on testosterone, maybe 3 by this point in time. And I no longer looked nor sounded like a woman. I never thought that I would be able to ever again. And how could I go up to the people around me and tell them I was wrong? I'm still a girl. I'm still Chloe. Most of them didn't even know that I was actually a woman. But over time, I started to realize more and more that I couldn't keep living like this. It was destroying me. It was a real struggle in every part of my life. My grades were suffering. I actually had to drop out a few times during the later parts of my high school career because of this. And it wasn't until I was taking a class in psychology my junior year that I was really starting to learn about some of the things that were talked about during consultations for the hormones and the surgery. I was learning about how children and teens develop psychologically, about family, about parenting. And, you know, during the appointments for these treatments, I was told things like, your fertility might be affected. It was talked about in very vague terms, of course. And you're not going to be able to breastfeed after your breasts are removed. Well, I was a child at the time. I was still growing up. So why would I be thinking about having a family of my own already? And since I thought that I was a boy, that one day I was going to be a man, I thought, men don't breastfeed. Fathers don't breastfeed. Why would I want to do that? I'm supposed to be a man. But as it turned out, I had a maternal instinct. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to have a family of my own. And I wanted to have biological children. I wanted to do it the natural way. I wanted to get married. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to go through pregnancy and childbirth. And, well, I'll never be able to breastfeed my children, of course, because that's gone. There's no regrowing breast tissue. And this epiphany destroyed me for the longest time. I didn't even know what to do with myself. All I knew is that I couldn't keep going further into it because I was still a kid at the time. I was 16 years old when I made the decision to detransition. Adulthood wasn't too far off, but I was losing parts of myself as a woman before I even knew what that meant.
And you've had some complications, right?
Quite a few. Most of the complications from the puberty blockers were the ones that I experienced while I was on them. And I think now I do get joint pains, which are mostly bearable, but they're definitely there. And the testosterone, after maybe about a year being on them, I started experiencing issues with my urinary tract. I started getting urinary tract infections maybe about every other month or so. And eventually it got to the point that there was blood in my urine, sometimes even whole clots. And the doctors never really found out what it was. Each time that I tried to get an appointment with them, it was over the phone. It was pretty difficult to get like a physical examination, but they'd still say like, oh, maybe you have a UTI, let's put you on a course of antibiotics. Maybe you have a sensitive bladder, let's put you on this medication. And I was sick of dealing with that.
Yeah,
and it got worse after I detransitioned.
They don't know because this has never been done in the history of the world.
No.
These children are guinea pigs. I'm so sorry you were a guinea pig for these doctors. But
the worst part was the surgery, I think.
Yeah.
Right now, the complications actually came up about, I think, 2 years post-op. The summer of last year, the skin grafts that they used, the healing regressed, and they turned back into open wounds. And there's really no explanation for this. I've tried to look online for whatever this is. No idea. Not even the surgeon who I went to, he didn't make an effort to really find out what it was. With how confident he seemed to be about it. Well, you know, just put some Vaseline on it. Keep bandaging it, and you'll get better. That advice gave me a skin infection. It didn't make sense to me at the time when he told me that because, I mean, the reason why he said to put the Vaseline on was to keep it moist and help it heal or whatever, but it was weeping fluid. To the point that I have to wear bandages on my chest every day. I'm wearing bandages as we speak.
And this is 4 years almost post-op.
I think about 3 years now, yeah.
Okay.
Over 3 years. No explanation. No help. And it was especially tough during those initial few months, the initial year after detransitioning, realizing that my doctors, I'm nothing to them now. They're not going to help me. When I went back to my gender specialist, it was almost like she was trying to keep me within the mindset of being transgender, even though I was rejecting my transition. And I didn't really care about my dysphoria anymore. She often told me things like, it's just another part of your gender journey, isn't it? Is this not just another transition? My endocrinologist, who I went back to, wouldn't help me to schedule regular blood tests to keep up with my hormone levels. And she didn't really give me any advice on how to stop the hormones. So I did what I knew best. I went off cold turkey. And that caused me a great deal of issues with my health for a while. I was very sickly during that first year. Within about 2 months, I dropped about 25 to 30 pounds. I was underweight. I had no appetite. And I got very sick very often. And the urinary tract issues temporarily got worse.
Chloe, you've been through so much at such a young age. I'm so sorry for what all these doctors have done. You got through all that, you're still going through it. But I think you're such an inspiration to us all because you never quit, you never gave up. And instead of just taking this and feeling sad, you fought back.
Yes.
So I know we're going to talk with Angel from the Berkeley College Republicans a bit here. But what's it been like? As you started fighting back, I think when you were still 18?
I was 17
Still
actually.
17. So what's it been like fighting back against this world of trans activism, all of these liars, all these terrible people who say awful things to you? Trans activists say that they're all about helping children to be their true self. But as soon as someone detransitions, they're not celebrating you
Yes.
for figuring out who you really are. They're condemning you.
Yes.
They're saying terrible things to you. They're saying you were never really trans. So this has never been about helping children to be their true selves. This is a cult that just wants kids to be trans. And you're one of the most powerful people in the world fighting back against this. So what's that been like?
I mean, I kind of already had a sense of how it would be when I first started, because when I made the decision to detransition, I lost pretty much everything I knew. I lost the support from my doctors. I lost pretty much all my friends at school, and I lost pretty much all my support from the trans community as well. It felt like the whole world was turning its whole back on me. And just for talking about my regret and the pain that I had been through, received a pretty horrific response from this community of people that I thought loved me. It was a group of people that I loved, that I almost thought of as a second family. Now I was being told things like, well, what are you expecting? I mean, you should have known exactly what you were getting yourself into. You're not a victim. You don't have anybody but yourself to blame. This is all your fault. You should feel ashamed of yourself.
Wow.
Stop talking about this. You're making us uncomfortable.
Right.
You're harming the community by talking about this. And I was made to shut up for a little bit about it, even on my own personal social media. I didn't feel like I could talk about my life. But I soon discovered that there was a community of people with thousands of people in it who were just like me, who went through the process of socially and medically transitioning and came out the other way. And through connecting with these people, I felt comforted by the fact that I wasn't alone like I thought I was. But at the same time, it was also very uncomfortable to acknowledge that it wasn't just me.
Right.
Thousands of people have been hurt by this. And these people who I was speaking to at the time, they were all adults. But I had this hunch that there had to be so many other kids out there just like me. And it was then that I felt like I had this responsibility to uplift those voices, to repurpose my pain into something good, to use my story to help those other kids and those young men and women who are going through this.
And before Angel comes in, one last question. Tell us one good thing, one positive thing that you've learned about yourself during this journey. Maybe something that can inspire everyone else who feels afraid to fight back.
There's a lot of things that I've learned, but I think one of the most important lessons was that, I mean, no matter what you've been through, what's been done to you, how you've been hurt, or what you've lost, there's always something out there to live for. There's always a purpose. And also in speaking the truth and living truthfully, you're going to face a lot of hardships. It's not going to be easy, and you probably will lose a lot, including a lot of friends, a lot of bridges might be burned. But you'll gain so much more. It'll be worth it in the end.
That's right. I tell people all the time, I've gained more great friends in my mid-40s than I had the rest of my life combined. And whenever you embark on something new in life, there's always a down period. You're drastically changing. It doesn't shoot up right away. But you just got to keep pushing through, and then that down period turns into an up. And then as you keep pushing, you might go through another down period, but then it turns around again. And we just got to keep going, because thousands of kids are being harmed. Chloe, you're such an inspiration. I'm glad you didn't quit. I'm glad you felt that calling. And I'm so thankful that you're in this fight with all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
That was such an amazing testimony. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to try and squeeze in a few questions. We'll see what happens. But so touching on how your gender specialist still tried to push the idea that you're trans when you were trying to do detransition, how has this journey, this entire journey, given you guys both insights into the motivations behind the people pushing gender ideology in terms of a greater agenda?
It's definitely ideological. And I do think that there are 3 different kinds of doctors. There are the ones who really are benevolent. They really think that they're doing their patients a favor, but they're incredibly misguided. They're the ones who are just going with the program, just going along with standards, and they don't really care. And I think that's just as evil as the doctors who are in it for social, political, and financial gain. I think that I had all of those.
The question again was about the...
Yeah, this is more so about how has your journey in this realm given you insights into the motivations behind the people pushing gender ideology in terms of a greater agenda?
So this concept of gender identity, I mean, it goes back to pre-Nazi era with a man named Magnus Hirschfeld. In more modern times, this really kicked off with a guy called John Money, a doctor out of Johns Hopkins University, who theorized this concept of a gender identity. And I encourage people to look up a documentary with John Money and the Reimer twins, a boy named David Reimer. It's a really gruesome story. This boy went for a circumcision when he was 8 months old, and this electrical device malfunctioned, and it burned this little baby boy's penis right off. And the mom somehow got in touch with John Money, and they decided to raise this boy as a girl and not tell him he was really a boy. And the doctor's a pedophile. It's a long, disgusting story. And as adults, both of these twin boys ended up committing suicide. But this theory of gender has been floating around academia for decades. And I really do view this as a cult, where a lot of these people legitimately believe that we have something akin to a gendered soul. That there's our biological sex, but then there's our feeling. And they essentially believe that we're all in drag, performing the stereotypes associated with our sex. And the entirety of this cult of gender is based on a lie. We don't have a gender identity. That's all nonsense. We have a personality. I say all the time there are 2 sexes, there are 0 genders, there are infinite personalities, because that sums us all up. And so there are people who essentially are cult members who, like in any cult, they self-police their own thoughts. They don't allow people like me to penetrate through this wall that they've put up so that they can understand the truth about it. They don't want to know the truth. They want to believe that this is all true. And this is one reason why with detransitioners, it normally takes them a long time to detransition. You'll see them when they're 25 or 30, 10, 15 years after the fact, finally coming to terms that this fantasy they've been chasing is never going to become a reality. Medical complications start to kick in, and that's when a lot of them will admit that this was all a mistake. But we have a cult that has permeated all of society. This is being pushed by the UN, the World Health Organization, all of these leftist political parties. It's now in schools. It's everywhere. And because it's so big and pervasive, people think there must be some legitimacy to it. And this is a flaw with humans. It's like the big lie theory that Hitler propagated. The bigger the lie, the more people are likely to believe it. That's what's going on here. And there's nothing true to any of it. So, insights, humans are easily deceived. And we've got to be able to tell the truth with compassion. We've got to not be bombastic about it. We've just got to tell it straight. Because when people learn the truth about this, these lies just shatter. And people finally start to get it. And we're seeing that happening. And people like Elon Musk talk about this mind virus that's affected all of society. This mind virus is affecting us in many different facets. This is the craziest of them all. And I think the more people learn about this, the more we can start to target some of these other areas of society as well. But culturally, this is the number one issue of the day. There's no legitimacy to any of it. And that's what people really need to understand.
Thank you. Yeah, amen. This is a pretty important one. Do you guys see this issue of gender transition, pronoun, just in general, the gender ideology, further spreading and building upon itself, or do you see it diminishing in the near future with the work that you're doing?
I think we're definitely starting to see a shift in culture. A lot of people are waking up, and I honestly don't think that this whole craze won't last any longer than maybe about even half a decade. I mean, I've been speaking for, I and many other detransitioners have only been speaking on legislation for about a year or so, and already nearly half of all the states in the US have passed measures to stop this from happening to children ever again.
Yeah, these trans activists made one fatal error. They came between parents and their kids.
Yes.
You come in between me and my kids, I'm sorry, you're gonna lose every single time. And the more parents who learn about this, we all feel the same way. So as she said, yes, all these states have taken action to stop this. We have entire countries where it wasn't legislated away. It was the medical boards who've taken care of this. We now have tens of thousands of protesters all across Canada. We have a parental rights movement growing throughout the United States. We've got organizations like Moms for Liberty, who are only not even 3 years old, but they have 130,000 moms fighting for this all across the country. We now have conservatives running for school boards, which never happened before, because conservatives don't like to do that stuff. They like to go home and have a barbecue and play with the kids and watch the football game. Meanwhile, all these people on the far left who have no lives other than their activism have been dominating school boards and changing the face of the nation and getting into universities as professors where they get tenure and you can never get rid of them, and indoctrinating this entire generation of kids who then become the teachers and the social workers and the counselors and the HR employees. Whoever would have thought that HR employees would change the face of the world? But that's what's happening. And so people are learning and we're winning, but the far left keeps doubling down. Gavin Newsom, some of these bills this guy signed recently are outrageous, taking parents' rights away. Kids in school now don't have to come home. They can say that there's been abuse. They can say that their parents are mean or whatever, and without any evidence, the state of California can now put these kids into a group home without telling the parents where they are. Your kid just doesn't come home from school that day, with no evidence. In Washington State, a 13-year-old can get puberty blockers, testosterone, surgery, using their parents' private insurance, but without the parents' knowledge or consent. And the parent will get a bill for the copay, but the drugs and procedures are redacted. Yes. Other states are passing all sorts of crazy bills. California is a sanctuary state now. And other states are doing the same thing, where a kid from Texas could run away from home. They won't return the kid home because the kid wants to get transitioned. A mom could bring the child. They could be in the middle of a custody dispute. She could bring her child to California, and California will ignore arrest warrants, court orders, subpoenas, and custody agreements from the home state. This needs to be challenged at the Supreme Court. But there's an attack on parental rights, and some of these blue states are doubling down and tripling down. Meanwhile, the red states are all passing great legislation. So the nation is broken in many respects. But this is always the way it was going to be. It was always going to be the conservative states first, then the purple states. But the positive thing is I can tell you, as a guy who's had more conversations about this on the street than anyone in the world, 2,500, 3,000 hours spent talking to people, most Democrats don't support this. The voters don't. There's a disconnect. The party aren't listening to their constituents. None of the black community supports this. There's a few on college campuses. But my number one demographic who supports me is the black community, the Hispanic community. The immigrants don't support this. The Muslims don't support this. The Christians don't. This is a huge winning issue for any politician. A conservative will never lose a conservative vote. They're only going to pick up the centrists and the moderate leftists. Sir, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
John Dennison, Chairman of San Francisco.
Sure.
Party. Yvette Berkeley is running against Scott Wiener, who is the proponent of all this stuff. And this is a lead issue for Republicans to take on liberal women who don't want this for their kids in, of all places, San Francisco. Yvette Berkeley, everyone.
So let me just recap that. Yvette, why don't you come on up here, actually? I'm sorry. We're going to wing this. So for those who didn't hear, and for those watching at Twitter, there's going to be a lot of people watching this. Yvette Corcoran is running against Scott Wiener. This guy lives up to his last name. He's pushing all sorts of ridiculous legislation to destroy parental rights. He is a threat to children and to parents, and Yvette has to win. You have to win. Why don't you say a few words?
Get the word out. More important than the presidential.
A little bit. At least here in California, you know, I learned about this about a year and a half ago when I first heard Aaron Friday speak and then had the opportunity to meet a couple of times at speaking events. I remember seeing you speak live the first time in Sacramento for the Detransitioner Awareness Day. And, you know, I can't think of anything more important than this issue because I think about anorexia, and that's a dysphoria. And when children have anorexia and parents bring their children to the doctors or the therapists, they don't give them diet pills and schedule them for their gastric bypass surgery or lap band. They treat their dysphoria. Here we need to treat these children's dysphoria, and when it's being taught in the schools and these children are being confused and then encouraged to do this, we live in a workplace and a school place right now where it's mandatory almost to use pronouns. I'm sorry, this is not okay. When I was in high school or junior high school, I can't remember which grade it was, and we learned about our reproductive system. It was our reproductive system, and that was it. They weren't teaching us about, I'm not going to get too far into it because, I mean, they're teaching you how to have sex, what to have sex with. You teach them about the reproductive system and how it works and leave it there. Leave the rest of the conversation to happen at home with the families. So, as I can't remember which one of you guys were saying, when they come after our children, it is our duty to get in the way. One thing I might mention is, I'm a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for 25 years. I worked at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, and we were one of the very first gender reassignment surgery centers in Northern California. I worked in a department where more male to female patients who are wanting to transition came in, and they were my patients. I have treated patients who were in the process of transitioning, and I love my gay patients, my lesbian patients, my bisexual patients, and those who are maybe transitioning, but the difference is they were all adults. So back then, 7, 8 years ago, we only did this with adults. The standard of care back then was these individuals had to have extensive psychological evaluations. They had to cross-dress for a year before they could get the hormone blockers. And now they've removed that standard, they've lowered the age limit, and they're offering it to children. When children cannot drive a car, get a tattoo, get their ears pierced without their parents' consent, buy cigarettes, vote, or fight in our armed services, or buy alcohol, why are they able to self-diagnose, choose their treatment, and mutilate their bodies? This is unacceptable. What you want to do to yourself when you're an adult, have at it. But you have to leave our children alone.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do everything I can to get in the way, put myself in between these individuals, I call them evil people, and our children. And I hope each and every one of you do as well, because our children, when we as adults are afraid to stand up, when we are silenced, how are our children supposed to fight for themselves? We have to protect our children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more pretty pressing questions. We're gonna wait until the building kicks us out, maybe. Okay, so you guys mentioned the AAP a lot, and you mentioned Finland and Sweden. So why do you think the AAP and other medical organizations ignore countries like Finland and Sweden, who have conducted systemic reviews and found that this is not helping kids?
I think that a big part of it is that we're in the US, where everything is motivated by money and politics. And there's a huge financial incentive to do these treatments, especially the younger that you go. I've heard that some of the lifetime costs for transition can be up to like $300,000 and per patient. And the younger that you go with these treatments, as was stated earlier, if you start a child on these treatments at a certain tender stage of puberty, they will be completely sexually dysfunctional as adults. They will not be able to have any children of their own. And they're going to have all these complications with the rest of their treatment and with the rest of their health that will have to be addressed with further surgery and medication. And the same goes for pretty much any patient who's on these for years. After a certain amount of time, hormones will compromise the reproductive system permanently. And after the removal of the gonads and other parts of the reproductive system, obviously you won't be able to have kids of your own. So you'll probably have to end up having interventions in order to have children, which is already expensive. And again, more and more complications will pop up over the course of your lifetime, over the course of the decades that you're on this.
Yeah, so the AAP is run by ideologues. I mean, look at COVID and all this stuff. Do we have any faith in the people who run these institutions anymore? They're all liars. They're all corrupt. The good news, though, is because of us, all of you, everyone else fighting this, because of all the outrage, the American Academy of Pediatrics has finally announced, about a month and a half ago, that they are conducting a systematic review of all the evidence. So, we'll see. Will they do it honestly? I doubt it. But they're going to have to make some concessions for sure. This is a win no matter what. I don't trust they're going to do a great job with it.
No.
But again, it's because of all the noise we're making that they have finally had to do something. They had been rejecting calls from doctors within their own body to conduct this systematic review. But the more doctors who learn, like the people you were talking to at their convention, they put pressure on their own leadership. And guess what? They get to vote for their leadership. So we still have democracy in this country. We need to use it, but it's not very effective if people don't know what's going on. So number one thing to fix all of this is always awareness campaigning. Everything else comes downstream from that. We'll come to questions in the audience after this last question.
Nice exciting. So you mentioned a lot about social media and how it kind of influenced your journey with transitioning. So how much of an impact do you think social media has on promoting gender ideology? What do you think that we can do about it?
I mean, for me personally, it was the biggest impact. I didn't really know what transgenderism even was until I actually started using my phone and social media. And the transgender community online, it's with how closely knit it seems, with how inviting it seems, with how the people within it seem to be different and accepting of those with differences. It really draws in, especially young kids and young adults who have been bullied, who have been through trauma, who have broken families, because it gives them a sense of community. It gives them a way out. And it gives these distressed children and young men and women an explanation for why they hate themselves, why they hate their bodies.
Yes, social media is number one. Every single child transitioning has some social media influence, without fail. School, number two. A lot of these kids now are joining these gender and sexuality alliances at school. These are lunchtime clubs or after school clubs, where these kids who are struggling, they're not fitting in, they're being lured into these groups with free pizza or whatever. These are grooming clubs where these kids are taught that the reason for their discomfort and distress in this world is because they were born wrong. They were born in the wrong body. I'm going to quickly tell you a tragic story of a young girl here in California. Her name was Yaley Martinez. She's the daughter of Abigail Martinez, who I have heard speak in person. And I have met her and thanked her for sharing her story. Yaley grew up a normal girly girl. She got into high school. She started to hate her body. She started to get teased about her body. She joined the school's Gender and Sexuality Alliance, where she was indoctrinated to believe that she was really a boy trapped in a girl's body. The school hid this from her mother. Why? One of the main reasons was because her mom is Catholic. So they figured her mom wouldn't be okay with transitioning her daughter. This violates the Constitution, of course. But mom was way more accommodating than I would have been. She was okay with even using a new name and pronouns from her daughter, but she knew that Yaley didn't need testosterone. Because guess what? Parents know their kids better than some blue-haired teacher who's been teaching their kid for 2 months. But the state of California disagreed, and the state of California took Yaley into state care and put her in a group home and put her on testosterone. And while she was on testosterone, still separated from her mother, Yaley knelt down in front of a moving train. And police had to pick her body up in pieces. The state of California killed that girl. And that started in school. So keep your kids off social media. They don't need it. My kids aren't on it. It's not a fight. They learned at an early age themselves that they didn't want it, because by having conversations with them, they were able to understand how damaging this would be for their mental health. And because they've never been on it, it's not a problem. But you've got to keep your kids off social media. I feel so bad for this young generation of kids. They're the first ones in the history of humankind that are growing up online and being subjected to all this bullying online, and it's terrible for their mental health. So yes, social media is number one. We've got to keep our kids off.
It's also important to give our kids the tools that they need in order to discern between reality and fiction. Because whether you like it or not, your child or your grandchild, or your niece or your nephew or your little brother or sister, we live in a world where they're going to learn about this at some point. If you don't talk to your kids about this, a teacher will. One of their peers will.
Right.
They'll find out about it through the internet, through a game. It's best to get to them before those outside influences do, so that they know what to do when they see it.
Well said. So we're going to open up Q&A. We do have limited time, so we will be pretty selective in who we choose to ask questions. So first,
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here and for talking to us. I'm a candidate running for state assembly against City of Bonta, so I'm wondering what specifically candidates like myself can do to help those who have detransitioned.
Okay, so I'll just recap the question. You're running for state assembly as a candidate. Congratulations, thank you. The question is, what can you do to help those who are detransitioning?
Well, for one, there are no standards of care for detransitioners. There aren't even any medical codes to bill for detransitioners. So doctors don't even know what to do with us. They abandon us. And I think it's important that we put pressure on these medical organizations, on these hospitals that are performing these treatments, to put standards and care in place for us, so that we get the care that we need with our hormones, with the complications that we're experiencing with these treatments, with the psychological trauma that we've sustained from going through this.
That's a great point. They don't even have medical codes. So all these doctors who just exist to make money have no way to make money off them. So they just ignore them. So right now in California, it's about to kick off. There's a ballot initiative going on. 3 ballot initiatives. Yvette, what is the name of the website? Protect Kids. Protect Kids. There's a CA in there.
Yes.
ProtectKidsCA.org.
The measures are about to come out in the next couple of weeks, and then California can start collecting signatures to put these ballot measures on for the election in 2024.
Okay, so everyone here, everyone watching on Twitter or Instagram, all of these conservative organizations, the biggest priority right now in the country should be these 3 ballot initiatives. California on its own will never stop transitioning kids, but the people can stop it. Yeah. Because when they vote next year, if we get enough votes, if we get enough signatures in the next 2 months and a bit, we need about 500,000 signatures, but of course the state will try to delegitimize some of those signatures, so you probably need 800,000. There will be 3 ballot initiatives. 1 to stop child transition. What are the other 2 specifically?
It's Bill Asaley's bill that the committee killed, which was AB 1314, so no secrets kept from parents.
Right, so no more secrets kept from parents, because schools right now are hiding from parents that their own child has a new name and pronouns.
And then the third one is sex segregated sports.
Right.
So no boys competing in girls sports.
Right, no boys and girls sports. So 3 initiatives. We know from polling this is a winning issue. If we get the signatures, we win. Period. We just need the signatures. All this effort to fight this in the country, there has not been enough effort to get these ballot initiatives to succeed. And honestly, I watch this and I go, what the heck is wrong with all these conservative organizations? Why isn't this the #1 priority? You stop this in California, you make waves across the whole world, and you ruin Gavin Newsom's day. You ruin his year.
I'm
This
all up
is
for ruining
such
his
a
day.
winning issue. Just according to polls, it's more than 70%. But polls suck. Because polls say, do you support gender affirming care? Some people are going to go yes because they have no idea what it means, but it just sounds lovely. As soon as you have a 2-minute conversation with these people, anyone who's normal at all is on our side. So these ballot initiatives will win. We just have to get the signatures. So go to protectkidsca.org, sign up to help, get other people to help collecting these signatures. Any one person can get 1,000 signatures.
And send $1 or $2. Everybody.
And send some money. And we need these conservative organizations to put their money where their mouth is, because there are organizations we can hire who will get the signatures for us. It just takes money. So donate. ProtectKidsCA.org. Thank you.
We'll take some more questions.
Hey, thanks for coming to speak today. So a lot of this conversation has been maybe like targeted at parents more specifically, but it's probably a given that parents will support this. I think the demographic that should be targeted, or maybe Chris, you can speak on this because you interface with like college campuses, is young, maybe even women in particular, who are told to reject femininity and maybe don't have that connection with having a child, so they can't really relate to this like idea of my child is 12 and questioning gender and saying something about this. So like, what's the secret to interfacing with the younger population, especially we're at Berkeley, right? We're all college kids. A lot of us are younger, and again, like aren't exactly connected to having kids. So like, what's your response with like to that? It's just like interfacing with younger people, because honestly, I think that's the boat that we're missing is younger people. Like,
Yes.
You're saying this verbiage of like gender affirming care. Yes, like that's a very popular term, and again, like yeah, obviously you're 20, you're 21, you're like yeah, gender affirming care, but again, like you have this young population that's disconnected and encouraged to be disconnected from having children and like having aspiring to have a family.
Okay, so question is, how do we interact with the young women? Like these young women on campuses. So number one demographic pushing this, unfortunately, is young white liberal women, without a doubt. Why? This preys on their natural empathy and compassion and desire to please their peers, their social connections. They've been lied to, first of all. They've been lied to throughout high school. They're getting lied to again right here in this university. They're being told the kids are going to kill themselves. Well, of course they don't want kids killing themselves. They're told that puberty blockers are reversible. Great sales pitch. They can just come off them and they'll be fine. It's all a lie, but they're being lied to. They're being deceived. And they're being pulled into this cultish ideology where it's weaponizing females' natural compassion to want to protect these kids. So we just need to tell them the truth. But we need to learn how to message on this. So the tactics are, don't just fight with people. Say things that they agree with. If they say kids are going to kill themselves, well, you can say, sure, it's true that suicidality is higher. Obviously it's higher. These kids are struggling mightily, and we need to help them. So right away you've found a source of agreement and you've lowered the temperature of the conversation. But they just don't know the truth. And there's no easy way around this other than just telling them the truth with compassion. Say things that they agree with. Say things like there's no right way to be a girl or a boy. Our kids are beautiful just as they are. They all agree with that. A lot of them agree that gender doesn't even exist. I talked to someone who identifies as trans today, and he agrees that gender doesn't even exist. Well, if it doesn't even exist, what's he trans of? Right? This makes no sense. But they've just been lied to, so we just need to tell them the truth. They need to hear the stories of people like Chloe, because once enough people learn the truth, we don't need them all to understand it. We need 5, 6, 7% to know this, and then it just grows organically, which it's already done with the parents, and the same thing's going to happen with the younger generation.
Chris, it's protectkidsca.com.
Okay, my apologies. ProtectKidsCA.com is the organization, is the website for this ballot initiative, these 3 ballot initiatives.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go here, here, and here.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for speaking. I have a question about the legal underpinning, of consent at that young age, because as Yvette has mentioned, in California you can't agree to a lot of things as a teenager. Even if your parents are getting a divorce under the age of 14, you can't even be
consent to a treatment. So what changed in California? How did they get that through?
So in California, they do need parental consent still. Some states are different, but of course, there are ways around that. If you're not affirming your child, CPS will consider it abuse. And then CPS gets into the equation, and then they take the child into state care, and then they get consent from the state that way. So there's things like that. That's what happened with the A.D. Martinez. But there are new laws being put into place to take away parental rights more and more. But technically, yes, parental consent is still needed, but they're coercing parents with this suicide line.
Yes, I absolutely believe that it's coercion. It's not consent. It doesn't matter that they wrote their signature on the forms. My mom and dad were lied to. They were told that there wasn't any other option, even though there was.
Yep.
They were given a fraudulent treatment.
In Oregon, it's law now, 15 years old, they can consent.
Yeah, Oregon, it's 15. It's younger in Washington. Minnesota has some crazy laws passing. I can't keep up. There's crazy legislation going on all over the place. But wherever you are in the country, you need to look into this. And just have these conversations with your kids, because when your kids know the truth, that's going to act as a shield for when these lies come. And if your child has any connection to anyone in this cult, you've got to sever that connection. If their friend is trans, well, first of all, there's no such thing as a transgender child. If their friend's identifying as trans, that your child is not in a safe friendship. I know it's hard, but you've got to sever that relationship because they've already got one foot into the door of this cult.
Let's go here.
So first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge you for your courage. I really, really stand by you.
Thank you, sir.
So there seems to be like a hodgepodge of different places of information about the topic. And is there like for instance, John Money's history and Albert Kinsey and all those guys? It seems like it would be super effective. Or is there like one place where you can go, learn about the initiatives, learn about John Money, learn about the detransitioning issues, all at one place, as opposed to kind of having to go search the internet for it?
I need to hire someone so I can make my website that one place. So donate billboardchris.com. No, really, I need to hire someone, but no, there's not technically just one place. There are some great websites. So GenSpect is a great website. SEGM.org, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, is a great one. Statsforgender.org has all sorts of great information. Really, these conversations happen on Twitter or X. So follow a few of the accounts who just focus on this, and you'll end up interacting with all these other accounts who talk about this. Because to be honest with you, the landscape changes every day. There's new news every day. There are new wins every day. And countries are conducting different reviews. There's always more information coming out. But some of those websites are the best ones to follow for sure.
Our Duty.
Our Duty. Yes. How could I forget Our Duty?
Partners for Ethical Care is another good. It's a good resource for parents who are currently struggling with this within their own families as well. So.
Parents of ROGDkids.com.
Hit Parents with Inconvenient Truth About Trans.
Hit Parents with Inconvenient Truth About Trans. You'll come across all these accounts if you start following some of the bigger accounts who are just following this stuff. But
one-stop shop.
Yeah, there's not really a one-stop shop for everything. But I'm working on it. I am going to be hiring someone, and one of their jobs is just going to be updating my website all the time. Because my website's very basic right now, which is okay. But I don't like doing that. So because I don't like doing it, I never do it. And I'm guilty. Twitter's fun, yeah.
Twitter's awesome.
Unfortunately, we can only take one more question because we are pretty over time. So,
is there anything that you can tell us about the lawsuit and the timeline for it? How optimistic are you? What are the implications?
Yes, so for those of you who don't know, I actually filed a lawsuit earlier this year against Kaiser Permanente as a whole and against my doctors who transitioned me as a child. And we filed for fraud and for medical malpractice. And I can't really give any updates yet. We are still working on it. And I can't really say how long the timeline will be for it because, I mean, that's just how the legal process is. It's slow, but I am very hopeful for it. I mean, these lawsuits are going to be a big part of what will take down this malpractice. And so far, I think now it's about 17 other lawsuits that have been filed publicly. But there's a lot more that we don't know of that are private.
Right. There are also lawsuits representing parents, like January Littlejohn in Florida. Bernadette Broyles is her lawyer. They tried to transition her daughter. They drew up a gender transition plan at school without her mom's knowledge. But yeah, now there's this law firm in Texas. There's Harmeet Dillon is Chloe's lawyer. So Harmeet Dillon ran to be the RNC chair. Hopefully she'll be the RNC chair in the future because she's going to do a great job and she's an amazing woman.
She's so awesome.
Chloe has the best representation and I'm super confident they're going to win. But yeah, I'm going to keep hanging out, so if anyone wants to talk after, we can do it. But thank you so much for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Just as some last announcements, again, this is put on by the Berkeley College of Public